So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of myself, Eric and DJ, and our entire D&I executive team, I want to thank you for joining us today as we commemorate Juneteenth. You'll recall that in some of my sort of previous communications over the last couple of weeks, we've said that as a company, it's insufficient for us simply to speak out and against the injustices and inequities of racism, and that in order to bring about real change, that it is important for us to actually do things. And this is one, I hope, a small but really important example of that as we self-examine, educate ourselves as a company and as individuals. So to that end, I'm absolutely delighted for us all to be joined today by the Reverend Kobi Little. Kobi is president of the Baltimore City NAACP, chair of the Maryland Task Force on Reconciliation and Equity, and dean of Justice Chapel. He's a very seasoned public affairs and strategy professional and is a renowned voice for equity, human rights, and global citizenship. In addition to policy development and advocacy, Kobi devotes his energy to advising, coaching, and training government, business, healthcare, and academic leaders, as well as young people in the US and abroad. Kobi has a very long history of leadership and service in pursuit of justice and community, and we are honored and really very, very privileged to have him with us here today. So as a reminder, the Reverend will be taking your questions at the end of his talk today, and you can enter those questions directly on your screen. So I'm really looking forward to the next hour or so. I'm sure you are too. And I'd now like to turn this call over to the Reverend Kobi Little.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good morning and good afternoon, OUTFRONT Media. I'm delighted to join with you today for an important conversation on Juneteenth. And we'd like to maybe focus on the theme, a mainstream without margins. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation with this company in particular. I want to salute Jeremy Mail and the executive leadership team of OUTFRONT Media for creating the space for this conversation, as well as creating the space for the emergence of employee resource groups focusing on communities of color, whether it's the African American community or a BIPOC. It's an outstanding act of leadership on the part of the CEO of this company, and I want to salute OUTFRONT and all of the leaders and managers for the work that they've done to create this space. Now, it is my hope that with this conversation, we will have a better understanding of Juneteenth and perhaps some insights on the stories, some of the stories of your African American colleagues and African Americans in the United States and African people around the world. But it is also my hope that this conversation will empower each of you to show up tomorrow in more authentic ways. My hope is that this conversation will help to foster community internal to the company, and also to help the company to find its way to bolstering its existing efforts in the communities that you serve and in the communities where you live. My challenge to each of you is to see this space that Jeremy and colleagues have created for OUTFRONT Media, and to enter the space, to fill it with your diversity, with your voices, with your stories, and even to expand the space and to keep OUTFRONT Media out front as a leader in the industry, as a leader in corporate America, and as a leader in America as a country and democracy. A mainstream without margins. Today we do commemorate and celebrate Juneteenth. As you may be aware, Juneteenth is the recognition of the day that those who were enslaved in Texas received the news that the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed and that slavery was now illegal throughout the United States and its territories. The story of Juneteenth is a story of messaging, and I hope as a messaging firm, the importance of stories and messaging resonates with each of you. But Juneteenth is not the only celebration or observation of emancipation from enslavement. We point your attention to DC Emancipation Day. Abraham Lincoln signed a writ of emancipation for those who were enslaved in the District of Columbia on April 16th, 1862. The Emancipation Proclamation was signed on January 1st, 1863. In Puerto Rico, slavery was not abolished until 1873, March 22nd. So there are many journeys to emancipation, and the truth is that even after de jure slavery was abolished, many people for nearly 100 years continued to live in slavery-like conditions under Jim Crow and in the segregated South. And also, even today, we must be mindful that there are those who are in migrant working communities in the West and in the South, and even in New England, who live and work in far less than favorable conditions. Now, this is a day of celebration, but it's also a day of commemoration. And in commemorating, we pause to acknowledge the loss, the pain, the grief, the trauma experienced by African people who were stolen, kidnapped from their homelands on the African continent, trafficked across the Atlantic Ocean, forced into labor without wages, murdered, mutilated, raped, mistreated, told that they had no rights that white people were obligated to respect. We must never forget this history. If we don't learn the history, we can't move forward from it. And that's why I'm so happy that today we're participating in OUTFRONT Media's inaugural Juneteenth celebration. I want to pause to take my hat off to Eric and DJ for the outstanding work that they did in pulling this program together. I want to thank Rob and Jody and Nancy and Freddie and Frankie. And in fact, I even want to give a shout out to Eddie and to Brian for the warm welcome that they extended to me on social media. And I invite you all to find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. This is important work that OUTFRONT Media is doing, and it's not easy work. So today we'll take some time to explore some concepts, to talk about the importance of stories, and to build community. The story of Juneteenth is, as I said before, a story of messaging. It is the story of a message that was delayed. Take a second to think about the pain that all of us experience when messages that are intended for us are delayed. Think, if you will, about what the trauma would be if your messaging professionally was delayed. Think about if the message that was to be delivered to you was the message that you no longer were to be treated subhuman. Think about if the message that was to be delivered to you was a message that would tell you that you had the right to exercise agency over yourself and to reach for your highest aspirations. Think about if the message that was to be delivered to you was the message that would tell you that you, in fact, were free. Think about the pain of not receiving that message for 2.5 years. Think about the pain experienced by the people who were to be emancipated by the message because they were enslaved. This is the story of African people in America. This is the story of the African Americans who show up to work with you at OUTFRONT Media every day. We carry that pain and that loss and that grief. One of the reasons that we carry that pain and grief and loss is because the pain has never really thoroughly been addressed. But we also celebrate when a message is delivered. And so while there is some pain and trauma associated with the commemoration of Juneteenth, there's great celebration in the fact that the message did arrive, and the fact that people were freed and were able to exercise agency, and the fact that people received freedom and were able to strive to meet their highest aspirations, and the fact that people were free and were able to love their family members and to connect with their loved ones. We celebrate the freedom that came on June 19th, 1865, for all of the promise and potential that it delivered on that fateful day in June in Texas. And so now we challenge ourselves to think about the stories that everyone that we work with show up with to work every day, the pain and the joys. You know, the thing about stories is that stories are an elemental aspect of our humanity. We are human when people see us. We are who we are as humans because of the experiences that we have and the stories that they tell. There's a lot of talk today about diversity and about inclusion. And I want to talk just a little bit about those terms, diversity and inclusion. Inclusion is the idea that there are people who are allowed or invited to be at the table. But even though they're included, they're only asked to be carbon copies of the status quo. They're asked not to show up as their authentic selves. They're asked to marginalize and to remain at the margins. Diversity is the idea that people are not only included in the conversation, not only included in the corporate environment, not only included in citizenship, but that they're welcomed and encouraged to show up as their authentic selves. Diversity is such an important concept. Science and nature show us that diversity really is what strengthens community. It's what strengthens ecosystems. But when there's been so much isolation, when there has been so much trauma, it is difficult to sustain inclusion and diversity. Sometimes we hear the antithesis of inclusion articulated as, we can't find enough qualified people to serve in this role or to serve in that role. Another way that the antithesis of inclusion is articulated is to say, well, we only hired the people that we hired because they've been with the company the longest. The truth is that inclusion and diversity on their own are not sustainable. And that's where equity comes in, and it's why equity is so important. Equity is that thing that we create to sustain inclusion and diversity. And I'd like to use Juneteenth and the end of slavery as an example. Imagine if for hundreds of years, your family and your ancestors were deprived of freedom, deprived of citizenship, deprived of ownership of land and property rights, deprived of the opportunity to pursue economic gain. And then one day you became free. Well, this is what happened to people who were liberated on Juneteenth and on Emancipation Proclamation Day and on DC Emancipation Day and on Emancipation Day in Puerto Rico. But there was no equity. The truth is that in the United States, we've had a number of attempts at equity. One of the first was Reconstruction, which sought to undo the structures of white supremacy and the structures of inequity, which made it difficult for newly freed African people to be a part of the American mainstream. I'd like to share a quote with you to put all of this in context. The quote comes from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King says, "We must now see that the evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism are all tied together. You can't really get rid of one without getting rid of the others. The whole structure of American life must be changed. America is a hypocritical nation and must put its house in order." Those are strong words, and they're difficult words. But the same courage that has empowered Jeremy and the leadership team at OUTFRONT Media to create this space is the courage that will help all of us as Americans to change the structure of America from an inequitable structure to a structure that supports equity. It's important to embrace the stories of others, because in embracing the stories of others, we understand our friends, our neighbors, and our colleagues so much better. I'm so delighted that Brian Cranley had made the decision to share his story connected to police terror and police violence with the OUTFRONT Media family. Police terror and police violence are the domestic version of the militarism that Dr. King spoke of. They are an extension of the Fugitive Slave Act and the efforts to marginalize and to dehumanize African Americans. We must be hopeful and believe that we can create a public safety and security apparatus in the United States that is democratic, that is accountable, that respects the Constitution and the rights of all citizens to experience equality under the law. The challenge for us in commemorating and celebrating Juneteenth is to hear the stories of our friends, neighbors, and colleagues in a way that we embrace them and they embrace us, so that together we can weave the fabric of this country stronger and more durable and more equitable. And by equitable, I mean sustainable. As a democracy, we must always value human life above all other things. We must value the opportunity of human beings to engage in the shaping and the forming and the determining of the society. Often when people are marginalized They are left in positions where they're not able to participate in the democratic process. Dr. King was known to say that a riot is the expression of the voiceless. Often we hear the response to riots and uprisings as anger, describing the futility of destroying property. What's often lost in that conversation is the loss of life experienced by the communities that participate in uprisings. Embracing equity allows us to hear the stories of all Americans and then to use that information, that data, to create a path that will allow us to go forward, not only strengthening our companies and communities, but strengthening our country. I'd like to stop there and open the floor for questions and answers and continue the conversation. I welcome you to ask questions specifically about the topics that I've discussed, but also if there are things that are going on in current events. We welcome a discussion on the current events here in the United States and hope to tie them to the hope and the promise that we find in Juneteenth.
Hey, Kobi, the first question, we have a question that says, what can folks outside of the African American community do to commemorate this day?
Well, I think the most important thing that all of us can do to commemorate this day is to understand the story of enslavement, the story of a country formed on the idea of inalienable rights, of the equality of all humanity, and a country that is still striving to align its deeds with its creed. I think we can embrace the joy of the celebration, and I think we can be encouraged in the work that we have to do today to know that as difficult as things may be, things do work out. Now, specifically, I encourage all of us to do our personal work to reconcile our own experiences with the realities of our neighbors and friends, to accept and acknowledge that we've all been injected with the venom of white supremacy. Doesn't matter your race or your ethnicity, if you live in the United States, you've been injected with the venom of white supremacy. And we must all do the personal work to rid ourselves of that venom, to embrace all Americans and to see the value and worth in all Americans. It's important that we do the reading, do the studying to understand the experience of Americans who may be different from us. Because in doing that work, we'll have a better understanding of how to do the work going forward. It's important for us to support policy changes that will lead to structural changes that will eliminate structural inequity. We should all be supporting any effort that expands the franchise and makes democracy more accessible, more available, and easier to participate in. It really doesn't matter if someone has differing political views than you do. If you're an American and you embrace democracy, then you ought to want your fellow Americans to have the same right to vote as all Americans. We ought to recognize that we can't create an equitable America without investing the resources to address the inequities. That means that we have to pay people to do equity work. That means that we have to make strategic investments in communities and in people who have been denied the resources that they've been entitled to for centuries. This is not easy work, but it is the necessary work. The message of Juneteenth was emancipation. The message of our day is equity. And all of us, as individuals, as employees, and as a company, must lean in and create equity without reservation in the United States. I applaud OUTFRONT for the work that you're doing. You're positioned to be a leader in your industry and in this country. You're positioned to help this country to become a leader in the world on human rights and democracy and equity. You can write a check or make a digital contribution to many organizations that are doing great work to stop police terror, to advance voting rights, to address economic insecurity and vulnerability. We should be calling our elected officials on the local level, on the state level, and the federal level, and calling for a shift in policy making that applies an equity lens to all policy decisions. Equally important is the idea that we must now begin to make all policy not with the most powerful in mind, not with the most economically secure in mind, but all decisions must be made with the most vulnerable in mind. And in this way, we will move our country from being a country with communities that are marginalized and vulnerable to a country with a mainstream without margins. Another way to put it, a succinct way to put it, in this era of COVID-19 is if your diversity and inclusion and equity officers are not a part of your executive leadership, if they are not central to your planning process, your management process, and your response process in the consumer theater, in the human resources theater, in the investment theater, in the ways that you do corporate social responsibility, in fact, across the board, then you really are planning to do what's always been done. And you're planning to leave those who are vulnerable and marginalized, and you're planning to sustain inequity rather than creating equity. So my message to emergency managers has been, if you don't have a civil rights officer or a diversity officer or an equity officer in your direct chain of command, able to contribute to all of the high-level conversations about emergency response and recovery, then you are in fact planning to leave the vulnerable susceptible to the crisis. And the truth is that all of America is in a crisis. And so all leadership teams should embrace equity officers in the same way that they embrace a chief financial officer or a chief creative officer or a general counsel or a chief operating officer. I hope that answer satisfies the question, and if not, I'm glad to elaborate more.
We'll move on to another question. We have an employee who asks, there are times when I do make mistakes and act in an unacceptable manner. I recognize this and am trying to change. When I am confronted, what is the best, most respectful way to react to that?
Well, I think the best way is to act in love. I think we have to speak truth to power, and we have to resist against racism and inequity in the ways that they show up. But I also think that we have to seek to bridge the gap and to build connections and to see the opportunities for learning and exchange, and really consistent with the theme of this conversation, we have to be able to hear one another's stories. You know, there's a lot of conversation about white fragility and what the responsibility of African Americans and other people of color, what responsibility we have to help white people to understand what's going on. Given all of the trauma that we've talked about associated with slavery and inequity, I think it becomes apparent to everyone that perhaps asking other people to do the work that we need to do is traumatizing and insulting. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have conversations with people of color to understand their experiences, but it is to say that there are lots of resources available for all Americans to take advantage of, to understand questions of race, to understand slavery, to understand wealth and inequity. And so I think people have to take responsibility for doing the learning about this. And I think we shouldn't get angry or frustrated if the burden is placed on us unfairly to explain. But, you know, to folks who are not people of color, I would just say, you know, exercise some level of sensitivity and then seek to gain understanding.
Thank you, Kobi. Here's another question. Can you elaborate, please, for those who don't understand why Black Lives Matter became a movement and why it does not mean all lives matter?
Well, it's contextual. Ralph Ellison wrote the book in the 50s, The Invisible Man. W.E.B. Du Bois spoke of the veil, this duality of the African-American experience, how we are full of vibrant people in our communities, but when we show up in white spaces, we're invisible and we are not seen. And the truth is that the lives of African people, as well as the lives of Indigenous people, have not been seen or valued, which is why African people were enslaved and treated like chattel, which is why African people were subjected to genocide, which is why Indigenous people were displaced and subjected to genocide. Because there is not a value that has been placed on Black lives, we have not been paid in an equitable way for the labor that we have offered. We have not been free of the police terror and police violence that we see in Minneapolis and Atlanta and so many other places across the United States. The fact of the matter is that many do not yet acknowledge that the capital that drives Wall Street is the capital that was stolen wages from African people. Wall Street was, before it was a place where stocks were traded, Wall Street was a place where African people were auctioned into slavery. Wall Street is also the place where the mortgages originated for slaveholders who mortgaged African people that they had enslaved. Wall Street is also the place where those mortgages were bundled and derivative financial products were created and sold across global markets to finance American development. African Americans have never been compensated for any of those atrocities. And so clearly there is a long, long history of devaluing the lives of African people that is unique in the American experience. And it is African people who are consistently still devalued. And so that's why the message of Black Lives Matter is so pertinent and relevant and important today.
Thank you for that, Kobi. Next question is, in a corporate hiring context, how do you respond to comments from leadership such as, we just hire or promote the best person for the job, regardless of race or gender?
All right, so I'd like to continue the conversation about Black Lives Matter and answering that question. If you don't see me and value me, then you also don't see what I bring to the table. And as I mentioned earlier, diversity is what makes an ecosystem or a community strong and vibrant. And so the idea that we are colorblind is just another way of saying that we want to maintain the status quo, as opposed to valuing the special things that difference allows us to experience. It is a kinder, gentler way of saying that everything must be white, when in fact we celebrate and we do so much better when there is diversity. Now, maybe the people who are available are all the same. And that speaks to the question of equity. When for hundreds of years, education in the African American community has been underfunded, when opportunities for hiring in the corporate setting have been little or none, of course there are pipeline issues. And that's why it's so important not only to develop the will to create equity, but to spend the money to create equity. There are all kinds of reasons why America must realign its financial priorities. And by America, I'm certainly including corporate America. When we properly resource African American communities, when we eliminate inequity, it means that all people can show up to work happy and creative and feeling valued, embraced in ways that allow them to be productive and to do their best work. And when people do their best work and we pay them well to do their best work, then they're also consumers who have the resources that they need to spend and to consume and to build our economy and to build our country in ways that are healthy, but also ways that are sustainable in the long run.
Thank you, Kobi. Kobi, and in the spirit of, authentic communication, as you've mentioned, I'm going to read a question from someone else that has an opposing view. I feel all lives matter. The destruction, damage, and violence affecting hundreds of innocent people caused by protesters due to the killing of a Black person by a few disgraceful police officers was disgusting and unnecessary. How may these disgusting, violent people be educated?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I appreciate the spirit of honesty and authenticity in which it was offered. What we see today in the burning of a building, or protesters who may lob rocks, or who may push police officers, that's not the genesis of violence. And this is why it's so important for us to have these conversations. This is a celebration as much as it is a commemoration, but let me go back to the beginning of our talk and talk about slavery. Slavery was a violent enterprise. And the violence that was loosed into the ecosystem through acts of enslavement and genocide, that's the genesis of all violence in this country. And it is patently unfair and dishonest to lay the blame for that violence at the feet of vulnerable communities who have been victimized by that violence for centuries. Now, everyone might not arrive at this understanding today. We won't all arrive at this understanding at the same time, but we must press forward to do the difficult work of arriving at this understanding. There is no blame to be assigned to African people who were brought here against their will, enslaved, and never, ever allowed to fully participate in this society. We still aren't there. It is, if you will, let me draw this example. When Patrick Henry and George Washington and others rebelled against British tyranny, they were deemed heroes. When Nat Turner and Gabriel Prosser organized to rebel and to resist against slavery, they were demonized. And so right here at this intersection, we can understand clearly how in this country Black lives have been devalued and why the Black Lives Matter message is so important. We can also understand why some in this country believe that violence against white Americans is unacceptable, but violence against African Americans is par for the course. We must have these conversations, and we must understand, we must hear, we must search and seek for the stories of people who are different from us so that we can understand the realities, not just of our America, but of all of the Americas.
Thank you for that, Kobi. Are you able to share any examples from your experiences of any practices or programs in a workplace setting that have been either helpful or harmful towards diversity and inclusivity?
Well, I think there's a lot of literature about programs that companies can use. Some of them need to be tailored to the specific company and the dynamics. And I think that's a kind of a more involved conversation that we should have at a later time. But I can say that I do encourage all who are part of this conversation to do their personal work, to read the history.
I think we may have lost Kobi.
I'm reaching out.
Sorry, folks, we're having a technical difficulty, obviously. Hang with us. And by the way, we have tons of questions. We're trying to get to your questions as quickly as we can, and we certainly appreciate them. Also know that whatever questions we don't get answered during this broadcast, we'll do our best to see if we can get Kobi to answer them after the broadcast, in which case we'll post them on Inclusion Corner for you. But keep the questions coming. These are amazing questions. We really appreciate them. And while we have this empty space and you guys are looking at this tremendous logo, I don't know if you guys caught it, but Frankie Ferguson is the gentleman who put this together out there in Detroit. He did a phenomenal job, so we'd like to seriously give give some serious props to Frankie for pulling this together for us. And hey, listen, so while we have some downtime, I'm going to do this. I was going to do this at the end, but we have to pivot a little bit. But I want to let you all know that I want to just make a couple of really quick announcements and put some things on your radar. First, we are tremendously excited to announce the formation of our BIPOC employee resource groups. And for those of you who don't know what BIPOC is, it's an acronym for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And if you're wondering, Kobi referred to it and referenced it a few times during his talk earlier. But just to make sure, and if you don't understand, it's okay because we're all learning here, right? But for example, People of Color also includes those who identify as Latinx, Hispanic, Asian, Pacific Islander, Middle Eastern, Arab, etc. And then also, as a reminder, for those of you who may have forgotten, an employee resource group is a group of employees who come together based upon shared characteristics or life experiences with the purpose of supporting one another and enhancing career and personal development. Secondly, we are looking to expand the D&I Advisory Council, and it's important to note that the work that we do is in addition to our day job. So we're looking for people who are passionate about D&I, people who are energetic and action-oriented, people who want to make a difference, because that is truly what fuels and sustains us. So if you're interested in either forming or leading or participating in an ERG, or if you're interested in becoming a member of the Diversity and Advisory Council, please just let me or Eric know. We'd love to hear from you. Next, we want you to keep an eye out for our brand new D&I communication, which we have titled Uncensored Together. This communication is going to be committed to exploring relevant racial, cultural, societal, and corporate topics that affect all of us. And we're going to be committed to reviewing and discussing this with courage, with honesty, with authenticity, transparency. And the goal really is just to build bridges of understanding through connecting and through sharing. And then lastly, we're going to be providing all employees with 2 different cloud-based learning opportunities. They're two titles. One is Managing Bias, and the other is Inclusion in the Modern Workplace. And the intention of the Learning Op is to help us all identify the lenses through which we see ourselves, the lenses through which we see others. It's to help us broaden our awareness, to uncover some of our own blind spots, and to deepen our understanding of the role that we all play in creating an inclusive work environment. So I just want to get all of that on your calendar. Just know that that's all coming, and it looks like we're still having technical difficulties.
Kobi, I just spoke to him, and he's making his way back onto the call.
Okay, fantastic. And then I see more questions coming in as well. And to answer the question, yes, this broadcast is going to be published. We'll make sure to publish it. It will be on Inside Out. It'll also be on the Inclusion Corner part of Inside Out. Inclusion Corner is under D&I. Right now, you can find Inclusion Corner under Human Resources. So if you go into Inclusion Corner under Departments, go to HR, and then you'll find it there. So we'll make sure to post all these questions there. And again, the broadcast will be there as well. And then we've also included Kobi's Twitter and his Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn accounts rather. So Twitter and LinkedIn are there for you. I'm trying to see if there's anything else I can answer. Let's see here. And then somebody called me out. I made a mistake. Frankie, my apologies. Frankie is actually in the Flint, Michigan office. And I see here that our entire office is proud of him. And you guys have a lot to be proud of because he knocked that out of the park. It was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. We've got and I'm seeing that a lot of you feel that this was beneficial, and I hope it was. And this is just the start, everyone. We have so many good things coming. We're really excited about where we're heading. We're excited, to have these dialogues. We know that they're not easy, but they're important. And so the fact that we have, with all due respect, that we have Jeremy, who has given us his full support. We have an executive committee that's entirely supportive. The fact that we are actually here today celebrating this incredible celebration. I mean, all of this is so much to be proud of. I know it's easy to take for granted because, we're doing it. But we have to understand that a lot of our colleagues outside of OUTFRONT don't have anything even remotely close. And I'm proud of our Diversity and Inclusion Council. I'm proud of Eric. I'm proud of Nancy. I'm proud of Jody, and I'm proud of Eddie, and I'm proud of Frankie. And I'm proud of Tim, who's been instrumental in, and you'll see the logo of the Uncensored Together that Tim Wazinski put together for us. And and I hope I didn't butcher that, and it's hugely just incredible. We're surrounded by a group of phenomenal human beings. And we couldn't do this without the support and the help of everyone. And so I'm not sure, Eric, do you think we're going to get Kobi back?
I'm not sure.
I'm here.
Kobi, you're there?
Kobi.
Yes.
We're glad to have you back.
I'd like to just close I know we're approaching the 1 o'clock hour. I'd like to just close with a few words of encouragement. I really do want to salute Eric and DJ for the great work that you're doing to advance the diversity, inclusion, and equity space at OUTFRONT Media. You're coming up on 3 years of work. And I want to say to the people of color who are your colleagues, be encouraged, because your company is doing great work to show you that they value your presence. They value what you bring to this company. They value you as a part of the team in a very meaningful way. This celebration is just a start, but the employee resource groups and all of the work that will continue out of the Diversity and Inclusion Office will not only enrich the company, but I think it'll create spaces and opportunities for all of us to show up more authentically and to show up with greater creativity and with greater productivity, and to have a better quality of life. I want to thank everybody who participated in this conversation today, for showing up and for taking the time to take in what I've come to share, and also to just give some important feedback and ask questions out of your experience. This is a tough conversation. We're in a tough time in the United States, and it's okay if we don't all see things all together all at once. We learn and we grow and we understand by speaking out of our experiences. And the hope is that out of this exchange, we all grow and we all come closer together. We weave that fabric that makes our country strong, and that will make our communities and our companies strong. Just as a final note, I'd like to encourage everyone to remember to work to expand the space for democracy in terms of voting. If we're nothing, we're a country of voters. And if people in this country are not able to vote, it's a huge problem. We will get to a time, we will get to a day when the message arrives that equity is our reality, but we won't get there without traveling the distance and without doing the work. So I thank you all and express my appreciation and gratitude for the opportunity to join you in this chapter of the work. And I look forward to coming back and working with you more as the company moves forward in this space and getting out front across the country.
Kobi, listen, thank you for that. And I hope you mean it, that you'll come back, because we got to a fraction of the questions out there, and unfortunately we lost you for a small period. But listen, we're thankful for you for delivering this message today. Your message is obviously very timely. You've given us a lot to think about as individuals and as a company. And in particular, the idea of having a mainstream without margins speaks to the importance of equity and bringing people and communities and teams together. And this really resonates with us. And in the wake of George Floyd's death, and I say that not as an isolated incident, but it speaks to the culmination of history and events that led to George Floyd's death, and then the social outrage that ensued afterwards. So we're now having the very necessary and the often avoided conversations about racial injustice, but bringing the people together and acknowledging our human interconnectivity really goes far beyond race and gets to the heart of what inclusive culture is. So we thank you for having us focus on valuing each other's stories and seeing ourselves as part of an ecosystem, as you put it, that really works best when nobody is existing on the margins, and challenging us as individuals and also as a company to take on the hard work that it takes to arrive at that point. On a personal note, I've known you for many years and followed you for many years, and you have always been a voice against injustice and an advocate for the empowerment of marginalized individuals. And as I've watched your platform grow over the years, I'm always heartened and encouraged to know that you've never stopped being that agent for change. So I thank you for your tireless work and your commitment, and encourage you to keep going, because I think your voice and your efforts are needed now more than ever. I also just want to acknowledge and say how pleased we are that you were able to be part of our inaugural Juneteenth Day of celebration. OUTFRONT has decided as an organization that it will be making this a tradition for the company to recognize and celebrate this day with activities and educational opportunities, and not just to commemorate the Juneteenth holiday, which celebrates the emancipation of slaves, but also to focus on the larger implications of Juneteenth that you shared with us. And it seems that the crisis of the moment seems to have brought about a tipping point, perhaps, or a cultural shift that has us as individuals and has our institutions engaging in self-examination and committing to change. And we just want to recognize that true change and systemic change really requires a sustained effort. So for us on Juneteenth, we will pause business as usual and use it as a day to reflect, to educate ourselves, and to really take an accounting of where we are as individuals and as a company. You know, are we living up to our values? How have we all made efforts to champion inclusivity and equity in our homes, in our communities, within our circle of friends and families, in our offices, on our teams, and I think very importantly in our business practices. And I want to I'll wrap things up by acknowledging that on behalf of DJ and I, just to acknowledge that, you know, these have been really difficult times for our country and for many of us. And when our employees are going through difficult times, experiencing trauma, anger, and frustration, then this is inherently problematic for the company. And I want to thank Jeremy and all of our senior leadership for recognizing this and for getting in front of it. And by, you know, first announcing immediately that the company stands behind its employees and taking a stand against systemic racism and bias existing in our organization, and then charging DJ and I with the job of identifying and rooting out the opportunities for disparity to exist in our organization. And there are just multiple layers to the difficulties we face during this moment in history. And there's never an easy or convenient time for our company or any company for that matter to lean into discomfort. And these are particularly trying times. So I also just want to thank our leadership team for recognizing the importance of this day and this moment, and really having the courage to clear the space for this ongoing conversation to occur. So we are definitely looking forward for what is ahead for our company. And Kobi, thank you again for being a part of this, and hopefully we can ask you to respond to some of the questions perhaps in in writing or some kind of voice recording, so that people can get their very important questions answered. And I'd love to talk to you about the opportunity to come back and spend some more time with us.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Jeremy, thank you again for creating this space. This is an important conversation, and you know, your peers across the industry and really across corporate America would do well to follow your lead. You're out front, and they need to get behind you and push to create the equity that we need today. So thank you for your leadership.
Really appreciate your comments, Kobi, and thanks again to you also. Thanks everyone for listening.